Let me ask you first, how was everybody's week this week? Great, praise Yahweh. And here we are yet once again on Yahweh's great Sabbath. Before we get started, if you have your scriptures, if you turn to Exodus 31, and we're going to look at verse 13. It says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for they are a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh, who sanctifies you and makes you holy." Now, if you really stop and consider this, we are the only people on the face of the earth that even has an inkling of understanding about the Sabbath day and the fact that on this day that Yahweh has created for mankind, that's shown all the way in Genesis 2, at the very beginning, He blessed it and set it apart and made it holy. Only Yahweh can set a day apart and make it holy, not like the Christian youth leader that right before I came in the House of Yahweh, told me, any day can be holy. For instance, I take Tuesdays off. So that's my Sabbath day. You just take one day off, and that can be your Sabbath day. That's the level of understanding that he had in regards to the Sabbath, totally disregarding the Creator who said He created 6 days, and He, the Creator, Yahweh, rested on the seventh. Now, He also says, previously to that, in the first chapter of Genesis, that He would make mankind in His image and likeness. Now, if the Sabbath's great enough for Yahweh to rest on, is it not great enough for all the rest of mankind to rest on? And mankind totally throws this out of the water. And it's the churches, it's the assemblies, it's the woman that sits on 7 hills that has taught mankind to reject this great truth that's found in the book. It's the book of Yahweh, but remember, they took it away from the people and they gave it back to them, and it was called the book, the Bible. All right, and it kept the people in total darkness. All right, they weren't able to see Yahweh. They weren't able to know Yahweh because Yahweh wasn't being taught. And we're going to get into a little bit of that today as we cover this sermon here on chapter. Anybody knows where we left off? 11. That's right. All right. Praise Yahweh. Chapter 11th of the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 1. Sin Never Again. 14th book of Yisrayl, part 1 from 2014. And this was from the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 4/19/2014. And it is entitled, "Science Has Discovered Microorganisms Throughout the Firmament. You Need the Full Story." And it's the sermon 4/19/14 from the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And Pastor starts off here. Let's look at verse 2. Let's see here. He has the greeting there in verse 1. But in verse 2 he says, "We're getting the work done. We're going to do, and we're doing exactly what Yahweh prophesied we would do in these last days." The prophecies that the great Kohan Benaiah just brought out, they show that, or what the world would be like right now with the sicknesses and diseases and planning to kill each other, and fighting in wars. And of course, this was shown. Yeshua, our high priest, showed that in these last days in Matthew chapter 24 that we would see an increase of these things taking place with the wars and the rumors of wars, the fightings, the pestilences and disease epidemics in place after place, and all these things we see would be in this time period, in this generation. But the main thing to focus on, because remember, Pastor said these wars, the fighting, the nuclear wars, the nation against nation, and the earthquakes and natural disasters, they'll take care of themselves. Yahweh's concern is not with that, it's with you. It's with you developing His character. It's with you coming to perfection. It's with you being made in His image and likeness. And that's the most important thing on Yahweh's mind right now, because everything else, if Yahweh wanted to at any time, He can put a stop to all those things. He could, But this whole trial needs to go through from the beginning to the end so that mankind can see that you cannot have peace without the laws of peace. You can't have life without an established work that brings the words of life to you. Because you can't just get it on your own. Yahweh always had a work. He's always had a prophesied, established work to bring forth his laws. And he's always used, certain men throughout the time periods, having overseers of that work, heads of that work, Maliks, as it's shown in Revelations, over different eras of work to make sure that the job got done. And they were trained up and taught just like we're being given the opportunity to be trained up and taught in the laws of Yahweh right now. But if you write for your notes, and I know I'm not going to have time to go through every single one of these little side notes I have here, but when Pastor says, he says, we're getting the work done, we're going to do, and we're doing exactly what Yahweh prophesied we would do in these last days. Well, of course, like we mentioned there in Matthew 24:14, it shows that the house of Yahweh, Yeshua showed that this message will be preached and published throughout all the world by the one who bears witness, and then the end will come. Well, if you think about that, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we move forward throughout the scriptures, never in the history of mankind has it been able, or have we been able to, do what we're doing right now in regards to communication. You think about it. The touch of a button, the flick of a switch, and you can see something halfway across the world. You think about things like CNN or RT and Press TV and the news organizations. They're able to broadcast things almost real time, almost instantly. Whereas 1,000 years ago, well, not even 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, you had pretty much, when they wanted to make an announcement in the town, they had somebody that was called the town crier. Right? And he wasn't the one that walked around weeping all the time as like a professional mourner, but he was the one that walked throughout the city, and he basically blurted out the headlines. He blurted out what was taking place at that particular time. And as time grew and advancements came, you had periodicals and newspapers and so forth. Now, mostly everything that you can get, that you want to get, or that is available, is downloadable online, if you even bother to download it. But you can just pretty much go on and read it right there. So as Daniel had prophesied that knowledge would be increased in this time period, it's enabled the house of Yahweh and the work of Yahweh to do so much more than we would have ever been able to do before. You remember what our Savior had to do when they wanted to go and preach the message from one town to another? You remember what they had to do? They had to walk, right? They couldn't get on Israel online, They didn't have dial-up or DSL or internet back then. They had to walk from town to town preaching the message of Yahweh. Now, they did publish certain things because letters were written, but those letters had to be delivered from town to town. And a lot of times the person that did the delivering of the letter also read the letter to the people for whom it was made for. And so it was a long, tedious process in getting the message out from one place to another. Now, Yahweh has made it so simple for us, and this is a blessing to us, and we should really take full advantage of it, because it's enabling this 2 billion that's going to come out of this great tribulation to have the message preached to them. You think if we were still in the days of Yeshua, surely Yahweh could have brought a whole huge number of people to it, but I'm sure the number would have been a lot smaller of who would come out of this great tribulation, because they wouldn't have had their minds already primed with the teachings and the inspiration that comes from Yahweh. Remember, they're going to be given a spirit of calling as well, just like we were given before we came to the house of Yahweh. Isaiah 2:2 also shows that the house of Yahweh will be established in the last days, of course, and from there it will bring forth the message, the laws of Yahweh. And eventually, what we're looking forward to at the very end of this is mankind is going to learn war no more. Of course, that's where our training comes into play. That's why we have to be as serious as we can about the training that we're being given in the house of Yahweh, take advantage of it, because this is our only opportunity to grasp this pure golden oil. I'm not saying that we'll never have it anymore, but to grasp it and to be able to qualify for the positions that Yahweh has in store for those who He's calling out right now. Those offices are never going to be offered ever again, ever. Right now is the only time. And the more effort that we put into it, the greater the reward. So seek first, like Yeshua said, the kingdom of Yahweh and this righteousness. Because without the righteousness, we'll be right back at square one where we started at the very beginning. So this righteousness is shown through the character that comes forth through the preaching and the publishing of the message, and also, as 1 Yochanan says, through putting to practice these laws, these lessons that we're taught in our life. It will start to develop this righteous character within us so that we can be used by Yahweh to eventually, as Genesis shows, have rulership over the things with which the earth creeps, that science is just now beginning to just scratch the surface of seeing the microorganisms that are in the firmament that they call the atmosphere. I'm just going to, let's see here. I got a little bit of info here to go with this. Let's see. So, let's see. Where do we want to go? Let's look over to, let's look over the first three. Verse 3. It says, by the way, Yahweh is not causing this. He's speaking of the sicknesses, the diseases, and so forth. Mankind is causing this. Mankind is bringing it. Remember, they rejected Yahweh's way, the tree of life. So He shut the tree off from them. How did He, what did Yahweh do in shutting that off from mankind? Yeah, carnal mind. The carnal mind. Now you think about Adam and Eve. They probably kicked themselves to think about, hindsight is 20/20 vision. Probably kicked themselves to think about the great opportunity that they had. I'm looking forward to the time period, and we've mentioned this many times before, when the firmament, the microorganisms in the firmament are able to do their jobs. When the microorganisms in the dust of the earth are able to do their jobs. I'm sure each and every one of us, anybody here who's, at least over 20 or 30 years of age, can probably think back to the time period when food actually had flavor. Food had flavor. It didn't. Now it just seems like it's just a watery substance covered in a strawberry has red, banana is yellow. But and then they give these artificial odors to make you think that, I've never remember a strawberry or a peach smelling like that, But when you bite into it and you're so hungry, I remember going to getting some not vegetables, some fruit. I think it was I don't know if it was a peach or I got turned off for strawberries after my dad had a strawberry plant in his backyard, and I was cutting the grass, and I called him. I said, I said, Dad, can I have some of these strawberries? He's like, yeah, sure. And, I'd never seen a strawberry plant before. I always seen them in the grocery store. I was a city slicker, And so I picked one off, and I started eating, and I'm like, oh. And I picked another one off, and I picked another one. And before I knew it, I was like, oh, no. There's only 2 strawberries left on the plant. So I had to stop myself right there. But, man, those were the best tasting strawberries I ever had. Well, some weeks later, we got some strawberries from the grocery store, and I bit into them, and they just tasted like tart water. Just tart water. And it was like after that point, I'm like, I don't want no more strawberries. That's very disappointing. I was all worked up for some nice strawberries. But the reason being is because the microorganisms have ceased yielding its strength to us. They're not able. Remember in, and I'd have to look up Yisrayl says, one day Yahweh willing will have this automatically locked in our brains, and we'll be able to instantly recall these sermons. But remember how he taught us about the kingdoms of the dust of the earth, and how the law tells us that we need to bury our waste in the ground, and how the microorganisms in the earth, they're designed to break down that waste. Well, in the process, it's that, I don't want to get gross with you here, but it's not waste to them. It's instructions to them. You know, they see a blueprint. They see a data sheet there that says, okay, we're lacking zinc, we're lacking iron, we need potassium, we need this, we need that, we need that, we need that. All right? And then they go throughout the land and they get those things. Well, a few hundred feet away, you've got your little garden. And you've got your fruits and your vegetables and things growing up. Well, those microorganisms are bringing things because what they break down is turned back into a usable substance to bring life. And they're putting those things back into the earth, cleaning them up, of course. And then out pops a nice, healthy ear of corn. Or, you know, a green bean. Or a tomato or something. And within that are all the nutrients that you were lacking to begin with that was decoded from the microorganisms that read that and sought to put those things, taking them from the earth back into your fruits and vegetables. That's the beauty and the creation of Yahweh. And that's what Yahweh is wanting to give us the power to have control over. Praise Yahweh. But we can't go at this the way the world is in rejecting Yahweh's laws, because remember, the Great Kahan will cover more of this, but these things they have to build a trust for us before they listen to us, you know? And we have to prove ourselves right now. Right now is the proving grounds, the time of judgment. Judgment must begin at the house of Yahweh. This is our time to be proved and judged and be saw fit for the kingdom of Yahweh. So our tests and our trials, you know, they're showing Yahweh, but not only Yahweh, but everything in the universe, every being in the universe, including the microorganisms, that we can or cannot be trusted with the great power that Yahweh wants to give us. So he says, remember, they rejected Yahweh's way, the tree of life, so he shut it off from them. And he even fixed it where they couldn't even understand it. The carnal mind is at enmity with the laws of Yahweh. It's bitterly opposed to the laws of Yahweh. So no, you know, it can't understand the laws. It can't understand the plan. Prophecy is for the believers, not the unbelievers. They won't dare even try to understand prophecies. Prophecies. Yeah, give it enough time, anything will come to pass. You know, that's the scoffing and the doubting of people who don't have a mind of understanding, who don't believe, as we'll find out. An unbeliever is one who's uneducated in the Holy Scriptures. And one of the things that has to be, and if you combine this with the peaceful solution, is a person has to be educated in order for them to understand something. You know, you have to be educated, you have to be taught. And in fact, the proverb shows that, or not Proverbs, Psalm shows, a great peace have they who keep your law. You know, a great peace. A great peace have they, and they'll also receive understanding. A great understanding, I guess I meant to say, a great understanding have all they who keep your laws. You know, a great understanding, which means that we have to be taught these laws, then we practice the laws, and then our understanding continues to grow. It's like in a practice of law or medicine or, you know, any type of trade. We might not fully understand something, but once we begin to practice it, we begin to see the beauty in the creation and so forth. And so we have to just trust Yahweh in this. He won't ever lead us astray or confuse us or, bring harm towards our way. You know, as the world says, you know, God does these things, and why would he bring this hurricane and allow all these innocent people to die? And no, mankind has brought these things upon themselves, okay? And we're going to bring them out of it, but we've got to be patient in our training. It says, and then he says, in the last days I will establish my house, and I will give them authority to understand this and to prophesy. Now, in Isaiah chapter 44, for your notes, in verse 1 and verse 7, it shows who he's speaking of. He's speaking of the ones called Yisrayl and Yaakov. And he'll give them, you know, the authority to foretell these events concerning the prophecies that are going to take place, that are going to come to pass in the last days. Zechariah chapter 4, verses 11 through 14, and chapter 5, verses 9 through 6, it also shows those men and the work that they will do. The work that they will do and bringing forth, in fact, if you have your Holy Scriptures, let's look back to Zechariah chapter 5. That's a beautiful scripture. In Zechariah chapter 5, And let's look at verse 9. It says, "Then I lifted up my eyes, and behold, two women, the last two eras of the house of Yahweh, sent with commandment. The Spirit of Yahweh came to overspread them, and they were covered with the covering of saints." Now we also see that shown in Revelations, which represents righteousness. Now that white garment there, righteousness. "And they exalted, magnified, and extolled the ephah, the standard of perfection, sent by Yahweh's laws, separating the way of the world from the way of Yahweh." Now this is also the work that's given to these two witnesses. Of course, one passed away, and there was one that was remaining to continue in that work. But it wasn't just him, it is him and his seed that are given to do this job in these last days of preaching and publishing the message. He needs a body. Yeshua needs a body. We're a part of the body with him being the head to get this work done in these last days. We can't be like, well, I won't go there. "And I asked, what is it? And he answered, this is the ephah," in verse 6. Back up to verse 6. This is the ephah. This is what they're teaching, and that's going throughout the world. Think also Matthew 24:14. "This is the ephah, the standard of perfection, which is sent by Yahweh's laws." Then he added, "This is honor, knowledge, and understanding throughout the whole earth." We also see that same thing shown in Revelation chapter 4 there. Well, let's get back over here to verse 8. It says, "The House of Yahweh posts new publication that uncovers cause of extreme weather." And that's over 85,000 views you're showing there, running that now on their websites. And of course, they're saying that this, which we shown in the news a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, time all, it seems like. I can see how a day is as 1,000 years to Yahweh. But that this El Nino is like extremely large, an extremely large pattern of the El Nino system. And the meteorologists are kind of flabbergasted at it because it's larger than, they say it rivals the one, I think it was from 97 or something like that. But in verse 9 it says, I've got to read you this. This is going to uplift you greatly. "Bacteria live at 33,000 feet. Microorganisms as high as 33,000 feet in the sky." 33,000 feet microorganisms. And he was joyous about that, because before, I've got a little bit of information here. This was what all mankind thought concerning our firmament, our atmosphere. It says, "The atmosphere is the layer of gases surrounding the planet Earth that is retained by Earth's gravity. The atmosphere protects life on Earth by absorbing ultraviolet radiation, warming the surface through heat retention, which they call the greenhouse effect, and reducing temperature extremes between day and night." The diurnal temperature variation. Big word I don't understand. The common name air is given to the atmospheric gases used in breathing and photosynthesis, which in the process in which plants convert that light and carbon dioxide and so forth to energy and water and air. By volume, dry air contains 78.09% nitrogen, 20.95% oxygen, and 0.93% argon, carbon dioxide, and some other amounts of gases. Air also contains a variable amount of water vapor. Now, up until that point, all they knew were kind of elements that were found on the periodic table of elements. Now they're starting to see that, hey, there's bacteria up there. And they're not just hanging out there in the sky, just flying around, frequent flyer miles, but they have a job to do. They affect the rain. They affect the sunlight. They affect the amount of heat that's trapped up and that's released, that's reflected back out into the solar system. These things are living and breathing. Now, how many of you know how thick our atmosphere is approximately? How thick? 90,000 feet. How many miles? I'd have to convert that to miles. I'm not really that great. 73 miles? Well, you're in the solar system. 300 miles. 300 miles thick is our firmament. That's how thick our atmosphere is. And of course, the farther out it gets, the less concentrated as far as oxygen gets. But it's about 300 miles. Now, they say it's about 300 miles thick because it fluctuates. The firmament is a living thing. It's like your skin. And it fluctuates depending on certain variables around it. Okay? And that's how Yahweh created to do, so that we can have life and we can have breath and we can, won't burn up and we won't freeze either. But there's a lot to learn about it. And we're going to, I know Pastor's not finished pouring out his bowl in the air on the firmament, but we're going to continue to learn about these things. Let's look over to page 122 there. And look at verse 12. It says in the middle, halfway down, it says, in the last days, in the last part of that generation, it's all going to end. That is rebellion. And in verse 16, just right across there, it shows in the middle, it says, the ones that are worshiping, will die. In fact, in Isaiah 14 shows Satan is going to die. She's going to find her rest at last. She will find rest at last in the grave, and that's the only time this female being will ever be given peace or be at peace. Like the old signs they have on the old grave, R.I.P., rest in peace. That's the only time she's going to have peace is when she's dead. Because right now it's a continual struggle within her mind and within her body. I'm sure she's just as disease-ridden in her body as mankind is right now, because she's taught mankind to do the very things that have brought diseases into their bodies. The Malachim just have a much longer lifespan than we do. Let's see. Look over to page 123. Let's look at verse 24. Pastor talks a little bit about, he's talking about the history of how he grew up. He says, now Yahweh is not a God. I recognized it, but I did not know what was wrong at the time. But Yahweh was working with me and brought it about that his name was actually Yahweh. He is not a God. He is the Heavenly Father who created mankind. He's the one who creates. Yes, praise Yahweh. He's the only one who has the ability to create something out of nothing. The gods that man worship, they can't create. They can't give life. If they could give life, they give life to those people like Billy Graham, who are big leaders. They bring them back to life and get them to preaching again to win more souls for Satan. Well, who do you serve? Who you serve, that's who you belong to. That's what Romans 6:16 says. You belong to whom you obey, of course, whether of righteousness, which is keeping Yahweh's laws, as 1 Yochanan 3:4 says, or of sin, which leads to death. And yes, that's also in the New Testament. And let's see here. Look over to page 124. And so he's talking about, practicing this righteousness and holding fast to Yahweh. And it goes back into a little bit of history about, this generation and how knowledge and technology has increased and how it's grown in this last generation. And he says now in verse 28, look over to the second column, kind of in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's about 6 lines down. Now that was up to this generation where Yahweh said, in this generation, now you get this, in this generation, he shows you the generation that he's talking about, where he would have 2 witnesses bringing forth the tree of life. At the same time, knowledge would be increased, and it did not occur until this generation. He said it would. He told you when it would be, and lo and behold, here it is. Knowledge increased only at that time in this generation. Now, I don't know how many actually remember making phone calls on the cranks. I don't know if there's anybody in here that remembers doing that, I remember the cans with the strings, but he was talking about that and just giving an example of how that used to be how, phone calls were made. And he said it's increased now to the point to where now, of course, we've got push-button phones, and we can easily call somebody up with just a push of a button in a few seconds. You don't have to talk to the operator anymore. The phone number goes through and the person picks up, even if they're halfway across the world. But he's showing how the world has no answers for these things. They don't have any answers for the sins, the cancers, the diseases. Money can't solve these problems. Look to page 126 and verse 49. But he says, now if you do believe what the prophets have spoken, and go back to Genesis 12 and read verse 9, you can see this from Genesis on. Yahweh gave a tree of life to Adam and Eve, and they rejected it. Yahweh took the tree of life away from them and put a guard to keep it from ever being revealed to them until the last days. Yes, where he would where he would through his house, that he said, in the last days I will establish my house, and they will bring the tree of life to the people under the leadership of a high priest called Yeshua. And up until that point in this generation where knowledge was increased and his house was established and 2 witnesses were established to do that, mankind had no knowledge of this tree of life. They really had no knowledge of the firmament before that either. Not until the last couple years have they been understanding about the firmament and the microorganisms that are in there, enabling it to do its job. But it wasn't until the House of Yahweh revealed these things and foretold these things that they started to take a look at it. And this is the great power, wisdom, and understanding that Yahweh has, that he's wanting to give to us if we will just humble ourselves, submit to the priest, and stay in unity with Yahweh through the one sent at Abel. So we're going to stop right there. Is it verse 49? If you all please stand, I'll turn it over to the next speaker, the great Kohan, Abel.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Please be seated, men. It's a great privilege and a high honor to address the righteous family of the great house of Yahweh here on Yahweh's Sabbath day. Remember the words of our beloved overseer, the Sabbath, the most glorious day in the law. One day with Yahweh is better than 1,000 years without him. We're extremely blessed above all people on the face of the earth. What my dear brother and fellow priest, the great Kohan Konanya, what he was expounding and reiterating this beautiful sermon that Pastor brought out in the year 419, 2014, at the great feast of unleavened bread. Pastor was expounding the importance about the microorganisms. Remember those prophecies there in Revelations 10, verse 7. But in the days of the voice of the seventh Malach, when he will begin to sound, the great secrets of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. We need to always keep in mind concerning those prophecies. If you have your books of Yisrayl, we are on the 14th book of Yisrayl, Sin Never Again. I want to place 7 words into your mind here. Pastor brought a series of sermons on the reverence of Yahweh. It's the overcoming power to sin never again. The overcoming power to sin never again. It's just right here. The overcoming power to sin never again. It's a combination. It's a collection of what we're learning here in the great house of Yahweh, and that's the series of sermons is the importance of sin never again, or the overcoming power to sin never again. We need Yahweh. Yahweh is our rock. Yahweh is our salvation. Yahweh is the strength of our life. In him we rejoice. We're grateful. We're thankful. We're appreciative for this great calling here in the great house of Yahweh. On page 126, I want to start off here in verse 49. 49, Pastor is expounding here concerning believe all that the prophets have spoken. Don't be deceived, only believe all that the prophets have spoken. Remember, Yisrael Hawkins, he's the righteous branch that the great prophet, Yahweh's great prophet Jeremiah, spoke of there in those prophecies, there in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 5. But Yisrael Hawkins, he's the gift of Yahweh that keeps on giving here in this last prophesied generation. Consider this, man. Your spiritual taste buds will come alive when you focus and concentrate on the every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. Isaiah 34:16. The word of Yahweh shows, search out the book of Yahweh. Search out the book of Yahweh and read. Read, study, meditate, contemplate on Yahweh's word. I, Yahweh, speak righteousness. I openly speak things that are right. That's in Isaiah 45:19. Psalms 145, verse 17 for your notes. Please take these notes down, because the word of Yahweh shows, commit these words to righteous, faithful, trusted men who would never trample the word of Yahweh. And in this sermon, that's the root of the problem. The Vatican is the root of the problem in today's society. because they're the very ones who actually took away Yahweh's, this incredible knowledge, the greatest wisdom of all wisdom, the book of Yahweh. The book of life is the book of Yahweh. We need to continue to respect Yahweh's, this beautiful book, the great book of Yahweh. Yochanan 6:63 for your notes. It is the spirit of righteousness. It is the spirit of righteousness that gives life. The flesh is useless. It is useless without the observance or the keeping of Yahweh's laws. So we see it is the spirit of righteousness that produces. It produces righteousness, unity, perfection, peace, joy, love, and eternal life here in the great house of Yahweh. But I, Yahweh, speak righteousness. I openly speak things that are right. Here in verse 49, notice what Pastor is expounding here as the great priest, my righteous brother, fellow priest, the great Kohan Kananya, about bacteria was there 33,000 feet up in, that's about 6 miles there in the heavens. But you can see live bacteria. But Yahweh wants Yahweh's people to be in complete unity with Him, to be in unity with Yahweh, Yeshua, and the righteous branch, Yisrayl Hawkins. I just want to expound here that Yisrayl Hawkins is truly the right man for the job. Yahweh knew what He was doing. Yahweh knew what He was doing when He called that seventh Malach, the seventh trumpeter. Yahweh knew that He would never deviate from Yahweh's righteousness, never deviate from the law and the prophecies. But this is the one who would come in the Eliah. He will come forth in the Eliah, the strength of Yahweh, and the glory, which is the prophecies of Yahweh. And this is where the seals are being opened up. Yeshua opens the seals to the seventh trumpeter, the righteous branch. And the seals that are being opened up, no one else can understand this unless one is in complete unity with Yahweh and Yeshua. And speaking of that righteous branch, Yisrayl Hawkins. Yes, when you hear men exalt him in the house of Yahweh, he is the greatest teacher in the world. Truly he is. He's well seasoned with salt. He understands, he understands the book of Yahweh from front to back. But here in verse 49, now if you do believe, you remember Yochanan 6:29, Pastor covered this last Sabbath, concerning the prophecies about the chosen branch, the righteous branch. This is the work of Yahweh. This is the strength of Yahweh. This is the work of Yahweh, that you believe. You put your trust in the message that this righteous branch brings forth. But if you do believe what the prophets have spoken, Pastor expounds here, reiterating Revelations 12, verse 9. Of course, this is a well-known scripture in the house of Yahweh. The great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and Satan, who deceives the whole world. What was the root of the problem with Satan? She was the highest-ranking female being in the kingdom of Yahweh. And her attitude was, I tell you what to do, you don't tell me what to do. I teach you, you don't teach me. She refuses to receive life-giving instructions. And that was her downfall from Yahweh Himself. Rebellion, that's what the earlier part in this sermon, Pastor talked about the root of the problem in today's society, about the Vatican, Pope Francis, and all the religious impostors. But evil men and impostors will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. But here in the great house of Yahweh, you know the voice of Yahweh's righteous branch, right, man? You know the voice of your shepherd. We know the voice of our shepherd. The voice of a stranger, I don't know. I refuse to listen to someone who you remember 1 Yochanan 2, verse 4, he who says, I know Yahweh, but does not keep His laws, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. Let Yahweh be true, and every man who opposes the knowledge of the truth be classified as a liar. Yisrayl Hawkins, he speaks the law, the Eliah, the strength of Yahweh. Proverbs 10:29, in the way of Yahweh is strength to the upright, but destruction will come upon the workers of iniquity. What is an upright man? He's just, he's righteous, he's holy, he's undefiled in front of Yahweh. He's undefiled. He doesn't defile himself with the gods. with and this part here, the overcoming power, this overcoming power to sin never again. This is what this character Yahweh is putting within us. This overcoming power that you would choose, that you would never allow even to break Yahweh's Sabbath. You will not encroach or infringe on your neighbor's property, his wife, his daughters, or anyone else. But let our spiritual taste buds come alive when we sit at the feet of the greatest teacher in the world. Search out the book of Yahweh and read. But Pastor is expounding here. Yahweh gave the tree of life to Adam and Eve. And the root of the problem here, that they chose not to follow through with Yahweh's laws of righteousness. But the tree of life is once again, that's why Yeshua opens the seal to this righteous branch of Yahweh, to Yisrayl Hawkins. The tree of life is the Elia, the strength of Yahweh. It's been given to the house of Yahweh, to a trusted minister of Yahweh, a Malach, a Malachim of Yahweh, one who will cry aloud and spare not and lift up his voice like a trumpet. But the tree of life to Adam and Eve. Yahweh gave the tree of life to Adam and Eve, and they rejected it. Do you realize, men, that you can reject that tree of life when we actually despise the life-giving instructions that comes forth from the great house of Yahweh? Let a man examine himself continually from now to Yeshua's memorial. Search out the book of Yahweh and read and study. When I say study, I'm not talking about going down to the library and doing your own investigation. When I say that, but we've got so much, an abundance of knowledge. The book of Yahweh, the book of Yisrayl, the newsletters, the prophetic word magazines. I think Pastor once said this. I'm quoting from what our beloved overseer once said. Have you ever seen anyone who loves the law and teaches the law more than I do? I've never seen anyone like me. I've never seen anyone like our great overseer. But he is an awesome teacher, man. We need to really concentrate. If we concentrate on his every word, on his every law, we can never be put to shame. When I say shame, people become ashamed because when you start breaking or practicing sin, that's what this whole series of sermons, sin never again. The overcoming power to sin never again. You got that determination. Yeshua was driven with determination to resist sin. He never entertained sin. Never did he disobey his parents. Yeshua was a man above all men who ever lived. He lived a righteous, very submissive and a perfect life. There was not an ounce of sin, not a fraction of sin, not a drop of sin in that man's life. Psalms 21 verse 7, for the king, what king? The king of righteousness. That's what Yeshua represents. The king of righteousness and the king of peace. Psalms 21 verse 7, for the king trusts in Yahweh, and from the love of the Almighty he will never turn to sin, not one iota. We must be determined, men, in the great house of Yahweh. When I say determination, we need to put away arrogance and pride, and learn to work together in the bond of unity. Work together in the bond of unity here in the house of Yahweh. But Adam and Eve rejected that tree of life. I pray that none of us would reject the tree of life. Enter through the gates of the great house of Yahweh. Be prepared, be ready to learn everything that the house of Yahweh has for you. We need to continue to rejoice and ever be grateful and thankful here in the house of Yahweh. But then Pastor goes on to expound here. Yahweh took the tree of life away from them and put a guard up to keep it from ever being revealed to them until the last days. You see, brethren, it's a great privilege. It's a high honor. I, Yahweh, speak righteousness. I openly speak things that are right. Isaiah 45, verse 19, verse 13. I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. He will rebuild my city and let my captives go free, not for price nor reward, says Yahweh of hosts. Look at the book of Lamentation 2 verse 15. The great prophet Jeremiah, he was inspired to write here. Is this the city they call the perfection of beauty, the joy, the glory of the whole earth? He's speaking of the great kingdom of Yahweh. For we look and we earnestly long for a kingdom where only righteousness dwells. Righteousness is what pleases Yahweh. Righteousness, the teaching of Yahweh's laws of righteousness. That's why Pastor brought out the Sabbath is the most glorious day in the law. Because that's the Elia, that's your strength unto life everlasting. For in this message is the righteousness of Yahweh revealed. But again, Yahweh himself took the tree of life away from them and put a guard up to keep it from ever being revealed to them until the last days. Yes, where he would through his house, that he said, in the last days, I will establish my house, and they will bring the tree of life to the people. The tree of life. Remember 2 Chronicles 20:20 for your notes. Believe in Yahweh your Father, and you shall be established. Believe his prophets, and you shall succeed. Believe the message that comes forth from the righteous branch here in these last days, and you will continue to endure and persevere here in this last prophesied generation. Let's go here to verse 51. In Isaiah 14, we can see Satan's goal, and I'm trying to help you to understand what's taking place. Yahweh says, you want to follow Satan? Choose you this day whom you will serve. We've got to really be determined. We must make up our minds who we will serve. I just want to show something here today. Our boast is in Yahweh, but if you notice that here, and if you look at the screen, that was basically my, when I studied the word of Yahweh, that was my daily reading, my daily bread. All these scriptures, I do write it down here, but the memory of the righteous is blessed. Proverbs 10 verse 7. The mouth of the righteous considers carefully before answering. But our daily bread, the daily reading, the daily meditation on Yahweh's word is what will keep you alive here in this last prophesied generation. It will activate all the trillions of cells within you for you to resist sin. But Pastor is bringing out here the house of Yahweh, the prophesied house of Yahweh, the established house of Yahweh. The law, remember the law is the Elia. The law is Yahweh, and Yahweh is the law. But the law points out where to go, where you will receive the knowledge of the truth. I will establish my house, and they will bring forth the tree of life to the people under the leadership of a high priest called Yeshua Messiah, the high priest over the great house of Yahweh. Again, verse 51. In Isaiah 14, this is without the tree of life. It was taken away. Her instrument, her best instrument was the Vatican. The Vatican, whose priests operated the temple which stood on Mount Zion, they took the name House of Yahweh off of it. That was the house of Yahweh that the great King Solomon built. They stole the wealth from the house of Yahweh. Remember, men, when a man is honest and truthful with himself, he'll be honest and truthful with Yahweh in everything he set his hands to do. But they're thieves. They had no right to that at all, and they took it to the Vatican. The city that sits on 7 hills, that's part of history. It's so strange that we're the only ones on earth who know that, and yet the history books are full of it. All you have to do is look up the name Titus, or the Arch of Titus, or the temple. It was once called the house of Yahweh, built by Solomon. Again, you see here, it was given to the person paying tithes to the house of Yahweh. The house of Yahweh. Always remember, always show forth your support. Your support in when Yahweh blesses you, then you bless Yahweh back by supporting the work of Yahweh in your tithes and offering. But Yahweh is our shepherd. Yahweh is our strength. Yahweh is our foundation. In him we will rejoice and be glad. Let's turn the next page over. In verse 59, I've explained it a few times, but let me tell you again. The earth is made up of microorganisms. Remember, it's very, very important here in these last days to know the voice of your shepherd. Because the microorganisms at this very time, they know the voice of the seventh Malach. If we come into unity with the seventh messenger of Yahweh, the seventh Malach, who is in unity with Yeshua, who is in unity with Yahweh, then these microorganisms, they will hear your voice, they will pay attention to what you will speak, and they will do what you would request them to do. But here, we see here, the earth is made up of microorganisms. We, the house of Yahweh, are gaining respect of these kingdoms. You know, one of the greatest things I've ever heard, I've heard a man of Yahweh, he begged Yahweh's priests when he came and he did his confession before two of Yahweh's priests. And he cried out to Yahweh and he said, Father Yahweh, please forgive me. He begged the priest, please forgive me for disrespecting the Creator whose name alone is Yahweh. You know, when I heard that, I really, my heart bubbled over inside of me. Because I've never heard a man actually cried out to Yahweh and beg for Yahweh's mercy and forgiveness for disrespecting the Creator of the universe. And that's what the Vatican, that's what all of these religious imposters, you've disrespected Yahweh, the greatest being in the entire universe. Remember what Pastor said, it's the greatest honor in the world to be called by the greatest being in the world. I've only asked for Yahweh's righteousness and to be called by His name. I have been prepared to bring forth righteousness. I cannot bring forth unrighteousness. This prophesied work is prophesied to bring forth righteousness. You see, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:26 for your notes. But the house of Yahweh are gaining respect of these kingdoms, the micro kingdoms. You remember Genesis 1:26? And Yahweh said, I will make man in my image according to my likeness. We are made in Yahweh's image and not quite in His likeness at this time. We're working at it. Because Yahweh is very righteous. He's perfect. And we must be like Yahweh Himself. I, Yahweh, speak righteousness. I teach righteousness continually. But they're kingdoms of microorganisms. There's one kingdom in my eyes right now, in each eye, that's helping me to see your faces. Remember what the law says. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face to shine upon you and be merciful to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you. We need Yahweh's countenance. Yahweh's countenance is His 13 attributes abiding within us. The 12 stones of the breastplate of the high priest as well, that Yeshua possesses at this time. Verse 62. If we had the power that Yahweh or Yeshua has, they would have to put them in captivity. They could merely command that they come and make cheese here in this vat of milk. Yes. Verse 63, now when the microorganisms learn that they can trust us, can they trust you, man? Do you see yourself that the micro kingdoms, the microorganisms, can they trust you? Job 15 verse 11 for your notes. What is man that you examine him every morning and test him every moment? Exodus 20:20 for your notes. I'm looking at my notes here. For Yahweh has come to test you and prove you, to see if the reverence of Yahweh is in you, so that we do not commit sin. Don't sin today, don't sin tomorrow. So again, now when the microorganisms learn that they can trust us, when our sheep recognize our voice, they will follow us. As Yeshua said, we know the voice of our shepherd. The voice of a religious impostor, no. Because they will continue to lead you astray. They will bring damnation and affliction. Incurable diseases will latch onto your bodies. But our sheep recognize our voice. They will follow us, as Yeshua said, now when the sheep we ourselves come to unity with Yahweh, then the microorganisms of the firmament will trust us. You notice that? Keeping our eternal appointments with Yahweh is what qualifies us in the house of Yahweh to be in unity with Him. I notice here at the South Office, when you come in, I notice they got a sign that fell down. I'm asking the workers, consider resurrecting that sign. They got it upside down, and it's facing that round building over there. But Pastor had those words. Either it got blown over or whatever took place. But I'm repeating the words what Pastor wrote on that sign. He said, "Unity in Yahweh's laws of righteousness tethers friendship with Yahweh, mankind, and kingdoms eternally." Please put that sign back up here at the great house of Yahweh. We need reminders. I need reminders in the house of Yahweh. Don't be playing around. Don't be playing around and looking at things that is detestable on TV or whatever it is. You're simply quenching Spirit Holy that is within you. It is the Spirit of Yahweh. It is the Spirit of righteousness that produces life. Proverbs 12:28, in the way of righteousness is life. In its pathway there is no death. Continuing here in verse 63, and that's what Yahweh told Adam. The earth is gonna produce for you. If you follow this evil, it's not going to produce for you the way it should. You're ruining your life here that I've set for you. You should guard and keep this the way I created it. We, the house of Yahweh, will guard and keep Yahweh's righteousness. Let's continue here, 64. Yeshua gained the trust. Yeshua gained the trust. Psalms 21 verse 3. For you meet him with the blessings of righteousness. You set a crown of pure gold upon his head. Yahweh meets each and every one of us on Yahweh's Sabbath with his righteousness. Yahweh is righteous in all of his ways. He wants us to teach righteousness, peace, joy, love, the peaceful solution, every man to his neighbor. But Yeshua gained the trust because he never sinned. There was not a drop of sin in that man's life. Hebrews 7:26 for your notes. For such a high priest is fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners and made higher than the heavens. Yeshua was separate from sinners. You remember in Isaiah 53, who has believed our report? To whom is the arm of Yahweh revealed? Do you believe the message of the kingdom of Yahweh, men of Yahweh? You do? That's what Yeshua said. The prophecy was written of him. Who has believed our report? Who has believed this joyous message of the kingdom? To those who believe, then hold fast to Yahweh. The law reads, positive law number 7, Deuteronomy 6:13 for your notes. Positive law number 7, Deuteronomy 6:13. That's the 7:613. Yahweh your Father you must reverence, and him you must serve, and by his name you must take your oath. There's no greater joy, men, than to actually repeat the words of Yahweh, the words of Yeshua, the words of Yahweh's prophets, Yeshua's apostles, his disciples, and the words of the seventh Malach. You'll never go wrong if we do that. I, Yahweh, speak righteousness. I openly speak things that are right. These microorganisms obeying, trusting in mankind and obeying that man, they obeyed Yeshua. Yeshua gained the trust because he never sinned, and they knew they could trust Yeshua. You know, Yeshua prepared himself. He never, little children, all of us, he never disrespected his parents. Never did. When instructions was given to Yeshua's son, you need to clean your room. Could you please organize your room? Get ready for the Sabbath. He never disrespected his mother. Never disrespected his Abba, his father. When instructions was given, children, Yeshua never disobeyed his authority. Never did. That man, there was not a drop of sin in that man's life. Second Timothy 3 verse 12. Yes, and all who will live righteously, and in unity with Yeshua Messiah will suffer. Yes, you will suffer disappointment, setbacks, persecution. That's part of our calling. Revelation 17 verse 14 for your notes. And they made war against the Lamb. They made war against this seventh Moloch. They made war against this Vatican and all the religions of the world. Pope Francis, you're making war against the house of Yahweh. But the prophecy shows, for they made war against the Lamb, but the Lamb overcame them. For he is the King of righteousness, the King of kings, and rulers of rulers. He's a teacher of all teachers. Next to Yahweh, of course. Yahweh is the supreme teacher of everlasting righteousness. But he's the King of kings and ruler of rulers, and those who are with him. Remember the prophecies, men. That's the glory of Yahweh. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. And those who are with the seventh Moloch, the seventh trumpeter, you're called to this great house to support this work, to exhort, to inspire, to educate others in the way of righteousness and peace. Because righteousness produces unity. Unity produces perfection. Perfection produces peace, joy, love, and ultimately eternal life. If you just look at it like that, that's the root of the problem with the things that we see, the chaos, dysfunctional families taking place, people, bloodshed in place after place. Peace have been taken from the earth. But Yeshua has revealed the seals to the seventh Moloch, the seals, the knowledge of the kingdom of Yahweh. The greatest of all wisdom is being offered here in the great house of Yahweh. Write this down for your notes. I learned this from the seventh Moloch. Salvation comes by righteousness, and only to those who practice righteousness. Salvation comes by righteousness, and only to those who practice righteousness. Take these laws and practice them, and they will make you perfect. Don't ever judge your brothers, brethren. Don't judge by the outward appearance of a man. Don't judge. Don't condemn anyone. Look at yourself. Examine yourself. Make sure that you're when you set on the scales of justice, as the great prophet Job said, when you set me on the scales of justice, Yahweh, may you find not an ounce of sin. May you find integrity, blamelessness. He was blameless before Yahweh. But to get that trust, we've got to come in unity, to unity with Yeshua. You know, when Yahweh first called us here to the great house of Yahweh, everyone, men, women, and children, all the brethren all over the world, when Yahweh introduced you to the great house of Yahweh, you know, it is an incredible joy to speak the universal language of the kingdom of Yahweh to all of Yahweh's creation. The universal language is the universal language of righteousness, unity, perfection, holiness, peace, joy, love, that is being brought here in the great house of Yahweh. And it's being offered to you. And I pray that we will be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of Yahweh. We've got to come to unity with Yahweh. Let me just fast forward. Let me fast forward in 98. Fast forward 98. We've got incredible notes here. This is a beautiful sermon that Pastor brought out. I think the cafeteria is, by the way, closed. I'm not too sure if they're closed, but I think we need the spiritual food more than the physical food here in the house of Yahweh. But the main thing is to absorb this knowledge. Pastor is in verse 98. The main thing is to absorb this knowledge. Proverbs 2 verse 6. For it is Yahweh who gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. But the main thing is to absorb this knowledge. Remember 1 Corinthians 1 verse 24. Yeshua Messiah is the power of Yahweh and the wisdom of Yahweh. He's the knowledge that brings forth, this great knowledge that is being brought forth. But absorb this knowledge that Yahweh is giving you and see that what Yahweh has done, He's created this. He let man suffer for these years. He brought about a Savior who will take over. He qualified for the office of high priest over the great house of Yahweh. He hasn't got it yet, but He's qualified for it. Many of the saints before us have qualified, but they haven't got it. Who's going to give it to them? You're going to resurrect them. Yes, you're going to resurrect them. You know why, how you get this? You're going to become in unity with Yahweh. Psalms 21 verse 7, commit this to your memory. For the king of righteousness, speaking of Yeshua, for the king trusts in Yahweh, and from the love of the Almighty, he will never turn. He will never turn to sin. Never did he turn to sin. That man was undefiled. He was a man above all men who ever lived. Speaking of our great high priest, Yeshua is the great, righteous, faithful, virtuous, and trusted high priest over the great house of Yahweh. You know, but he's qualified for the office, but he's qualified for it. Many of the saints before us have qualified, but they haven't got it. Who's going to give it to them? You're the one going to resurrect them. Yes, you're the one resurrect them. You know how, why, how you get this? You're going to become in unity with Yahweh. And then the micro kingdoms throughout the universe are going to know that they can trust you. You're going to be sent any place in the universe, and they're going to know immediately that you represent the great kingdom of Yahweh. Yakanan for your notes, Yakanan 14 verse 6. Yeshua spoke these words. Yeshua said, I represent the way, the truth, and the life. And he brought forth that great life, that great righteousness here in these last days. Let's finish off here. You know how you get this, and again, Pastor, in conclusion, but he's crying out, Yahweh. They're crying out to him right now. How did they cry out to Yahweh? They talked to Yahweh, as Yeshua said when he was referring to this very thing. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. Communicate with Yahweh on a daily basis. Talk to Yahweh. When you climb in a roof, you're working on a roof, you climb in a ladder, up high at a higher elevation, you're working in a very dangerous area. Communicate with Yahweh. Talk to Yahweh. Ask Him for His protection, His guidance, His direction, for His direction. But they're crying out, my sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. We know the voice of Yahweh's servant Malach. May we continue to endure to the very end. And pass in verse 100, sin never again. I love you. Yahweh bless you. So again, let it be our uppermost desire to sin never again. May Yahweh bless your understanding.